from all over. Welcome to the Zoom poetry reading with Scudder Parker for his debut book of poetry, Safe as Lightning. It's a beautiful book, and it's an honor to have Adelaide Tyrell here. She did the art on the cover and also the illustrations inside, which are also beautiful. My name is Samantha. I'm with Bear Pond Books, and I'm also with Rootstock Publishing. So it's interesting to have this event kind of be both of my jobs at the same time. I had the pleasure of working with Scudder on this volume. It's really been a blast to see this turn into the beautiful book that it is. I'm going to put the book link. Does everybody know how the chat works? There's a little box at the bottom that says chat, and if you click on it, it opens a little box. We're going to use that chat. If you have any questions or comments for Scudder, you can put them there. Hi, Sam from Philly. I am going to drop a link for the book in case anybody wants to see where they can buy the book from Bear Pond Books. It's our local bookstore. So there's the link. And I just want to say a few nice words about the book. You all know Scudder, so I don't have to do a whole bio about who he is, I think. But this might be your first introduction to him as a poet, and I'm really thrilled that you all are here to hear him read. This is a wonderful collection of poems that are hopeful, sad, pensive, gracious, and grateful. Scudder finds a way to express a world of emotions in even just one poem. His turns of phrase and lovely lines will delight any reader, from the novice to the skilled poetry reader. One of my favorite lines is from his poem, Walk with a Grandson, where there's just this little line that he says, "There's a bowl of wildness that right now belongs to him." And it just stays in my heart. And I really hope that you find poems here in this book that belong to you. Now I'm going to turn it over to Scudder, who will read about 15 poems from this collection. Thank you. Uh-oh, we can't hear Scudder. Let's make sure that—
There, how's that? Okay. Well, I don't want to spend too much time thanking everybody. I could spend the whole time thanking everybody, so that's a problem. But Sam, thank you for all you have done on making this a volume, for your editing, for all your marketing and coordinating work. It's amazing. And I just want to say, make it clear that Sam is a writer, poet herself, and has a book coming out, or books coming out, I think. One book. Well, no, you have others in the works. I also want to thank Susan, who cut my hair for this event, which was an enormous adventure for her and for me, but she did a great job. 2 sittings. And then I also want to thank her for being an incredible editor and guide and writing, but also the person who makes everything work, from Squarespace, which is what you use to create a website, to MailChimp, to post, what is it? Facebook, to Instagram. And Instagram, but also to mail.com. So that when we've been mailing out the books, she's been in charge of that. So thank you to her. I want to thank Adelaide, and I want to give a special mention to Mason Singer from Laughing Bear, who did the design of the book and who helped find the right painting by Adelaide to be the cover art. So with all of that underway, I think it's best to get started on the poetry. The first poem is really just about the way I think about what I'm doing when I'm writing the poem, and it's called The Art of the Poem. I imagine myself a cook, and someone has been stealing my poems again. I just left fresh ones on the windowsill to cool. Before I could get back, gone. Sometimes I'm desperate, and when the nephew of a Nigerian prince urgently needs a small poetry deposit to secure a vulnerable fortune, I respond at once. Generally, I just leave them on the counter, hoping the children and grandchildren will find them tempting and grab a few in passing like blueberries. I haunt my wife, latest edits in hand, embarrassed by my urgency. I want her to want to steal these words I have not yet found the way to use in conversation. And this is called The Poem of the World. The poem of the world reveals itself like a doe's hoof tapping ice till she can drink. Startles like the rust of purple on this fall's forsythia leaves, though it may have used that small voice every year unheard. Blinks like red and blue potatoes dug this morning, drying in the sun, testing their startled, untrained eyes. It's the unexpected tickle, the fit of shared laughter in our urgency of touching that becomes another way of making love. It's an ocean beach of pebbles that suddenly starts singing, each stone its own tink, together a glorious, indifferent song. And it's the voice of each bird I have only heard as morning chorus, landing with its own song and bright, perfect body in my brain. It is even, now I begin to see them, the subtraction of birds, taking summer with them, too busy to announce their leaving. The poem of the world wants me to wake in my own body. It is astonished I might let these supple bones grow brittle. It is the sudden thing I trust. And this is Davy Road, which was written about 3 years after we moved here. A man in clothes the shape of sleep pushes his battered bicycle, wire baskets front and back, halfway up the drive, and stops. He watches me raking gravel. You live here now? I pause, lean on my rake. I'm trying. We gossip like old neighbors. His family logged pine and maple, a few cows and chickens. Some summers a bear got all the corn. I tell him a bear got ours last summer. The house and barn were down there where you have your woodpile now. The house was small and cold as hell. The barn was better built. We go down, explore lilac, sprawling roses, honeysuckle, clumps of double daffodils, stacked granite slabs that held the barn. No sound, no sign of the house foundation. 5 generations in this place, and I, 3 years. Twice since then, I've seen him picking up empties. Once, just his bike, leaning against a tree. And this poem is called Rock Harvest. When I'm digging potatoes and the fork hits rock, I dig for rock. The logic of it seems clear to me. Susan, whom I have accused of conducting non-linear conversations, leans back on her gloved hands and smiles. There are clutches of bold reds, blues camouflaged against dark Rome, gold and pink Augusta, this winter's nourishment, but I am seized by gray subsoil, rust-streaked, dense with shattered rocks, some rounded granite nestled in them. When I clank and probe to test a boulder's residence, Susan says it's time for her to go pick winter squash. Good idea, I say as I reach for iron bar and shovel. Some work becomes its own insistence. That's how farmers built walls that weave across our hills. Every year, a new stone crop nudges sunward, quiet but determined. Above ground, they grow beards of moss and lichen, give shelter to small creatures. These are fields you can finally plow without stopping every 20 feet to curse, with walls that never kept a creature out. Next summer, the soil will be a little deeper. 20 years from now, someone else may garden here. I pause, watch Susan gather squash. She has already picked up the potatoes. It's her way of being gracious. We both know what it is to dig and worry at a stubbornness the mind takes hold of that calls out to be dislodged. This is for a poem for my nephew and about my mother, his grandmother, the voice he grew up with. Increasingly, the names of things fall off like tired labels from manila folders, lodge at the bottom of file drawers, or float around the room like butterflies. This leads to lengthy explanations that are difficult to follow. You know that movie where the guy who was in this other movie, I feel a new kinship with my mother. At dinner with friends, everyone else is full of food and conversation. I sit in awe of the painting, a sapling in a clearing, aching with its solitude. Suddenly they look at me. A question has been asked I've been turned to for an opinion. My mother's helpful whisper offers, tell them the quiche is delicious. She lives in a landscape without courtesy. It's not a terrifying place for her. She knows her husband's voice is gone. Her grandson visits, talks about summers at the farm, how they stayed with him through all his wars. She has not spoken in weeks. As he walks out the door, she says, thank you, in the voice he grew up with. The sound level okay?
A little bit louder would be great.
A little louder.
Yeah.
This is the title poem for the volume, Safe as Lightning. Long before guilt was invented, this stream managed rocks without it. Never a threat or wheedle, just shifted them when strength was gathered. Changes from every storm were there for my exploration. That's how its small riffles and dark pools became such freedom for me. Neither worms I pierced, nor speckled fish I hooked, cried out in accusation. In turn, they claimed me, taught me to fin in place beneath a dark green overhang of rock. Oh, how the heart is taught to bargain. Search the hard ground of obedience and its deceptions. I would rather sink my feet in black, loamy banks where a holy beaver pond spills its disconcerting welcome through the trees. There is no promise I will be safe if I relinquish. It is a place where for a few years brook trout fatten and the silt accumulates until some torrent tears the sticks apart and I come exploring next June's fertile mud. Nothing I can promise spares the children. My grandson shudders at colliding arguments of thunder, but will not be denied the lightning. This is called The Present, and it's a poem about the woman who came up to photograph our family just a couple of years after we moved to Vermont for a story that was in the How Young America Lives series of what was it? Ladies' Home Journal. In the photograph on our bedroom wall, I walked behind Molly, our first Jersey cow, up a pasture flecked with dandelions. Solemn, stick in hand, I gaze down. She looks calmly past the picture's frame to her spring-fed pasture pool. A corridor of trees divides this field from fields beyond. The brook that finds shade there rises from the root nest of an elm umbrella arching on the left. I can hear the language of that water, not pristine, but delicate and clear. Leaves are barely forming on the trees. A grove of poplars, first to colonize the open land, sits to the right. Spruce, pruned, dense by itching cows, scattered cones of black. The forest yielded this land grudgingly for farming. Use it, or we'll take it back. At the time, it all seemed permanent. I was 10. We had moved up from the city, ambitious to be farmers, learning honest work. We milked the cows by hand. The photographer could glimpse a story we were living, but didn't understand. I worked on all the land we own. My farm brother does it still. Flowers and grasses thin as tree shade deepens. The woods have claimed most fields since then. The brook still rises, runs its finger through the valley, irrepressible and plain. This is called Lost in North Danville. I don't know where the meteorite is now. Round, nubbled rock, flattened like a meadow muffin, iron heavy. It has resumed its ancient status as unowned. 50 years ago, we brought it home, our strange catch from an afternoon fishing Houghton Brook. Resting in clear water, we marveled it had hurtled through our air. A rusted pump and handle sprouted from the brook bed too. Iron wheel rims leaned against stone walls. Elements the same, but different. Both these had been human tamed. The trout swam over it oblivious. It could have come eons ago, seared its way through a mile of ice, or found this pool last year, still ageless, wonderful. At the museum in town, the curator just laughed and gave no answer, did not trust our story, so common when the galaxy delivers us its weighty cosmic dust. I haven't searched for it. I don't want it rusting in the shed, shelved in the museum, or hammered on some anvil. Like other things, it is at home, lost in North Danville. And this is a poem called My Affection for Toads. I find myself talking to them initially as though they were small children. Then correct, trying to be respectful, adult to adult. Even then, I am too enthusiastic, as though greeting someone I was certain I must know on Main Street, who stares back, struggling to recognize. About the tiller and its bad behavior, I apologize, though remarkably, that relative made it to tall grass with only a small limp. No courtesy, no cleverness, or deft protection. Only this odd elegance, tripping, rolling over, revealing its creamy underside in August peonies. And this is a poem called Talent Show that I wrote quite recently with great pain and embarrassment. She played trumpet at a talent show in the church basement, badly, with enormous enthusiasm. We snickered with almost no restraint at the music and her enormous, heaving 8th grade breasts. Fragments like this come flying at me like deadly pieces of space litter, still in orbit after all these years. And here I am in the small safety of my delicate identity capsule. She may be a grandmother by now. We might recognize each other in the checkout line at Shaw's. She'd ask in her husky voice about my sister and brothers. I'd tell her the usual something. Perhaps I could wait for her to go through the line, walk with her to the parking lot, ask about her life and listen. I've learned to do that. I suspect she'd forgive easily if I had the courage to ask. Or she might barely remember. For her, it was just another bunch of stupid boys acting like they did. Probably much worse happened. Yet here she is, listening to an old man explain what she's so long understood. And this is for the peonies who are with me today. Just about this time last year is when I wrote it. A fine cable runs from peony petal to light fixture above the kitchen table. A spider, smaller than a dewdrop, drew it from herself. In her ascending dance, she's indifferent with assurance. I bring in blousy, boisterous blooms, knowing I bring the family too. Small ants scoot toward breadcrumbs on the cutting board. They and 6 earwigs swiftly set up shop. I quarrel only fitfully with them to stop. Creatures emerge for days, buds surge open, shoulder into one another. Occupants visit bloom to bloom. Yellow spider quits the yellow peony, glows in a new magenta petal home. 2 days, one blossom or another tires, drops deep coral petals, as though a child released them in oncoming sleep. Drifts pile on table, slip to chair, still more colors, tarnish, spill across the floor. Sunlight fills the kitchen, but keeps moving. Nothing stops. Everything slows. Beauty slips away from nouns and adjectives, the vase, the sturdy shelf. It takes all my courage just to sit here with my less impatient self. This is called Visit to Harpswell. Soft shell clams have quit the small tidal flat beside the house. Only a crushed shell layer of evidence. Mussels have abandoned every inch, 216 miles of shore the township boasts. Over crab cakes and roasted root vegetables, we discuss green crabs, first brought here in ballast water in the 1800s, and like us, tough, adaptable, not much good to eat, invading up the coast. The granddaughter is 6 weeks old, still distressed by this assault of senses. Her mother's milk soothes only for a moment. Her father raises oysters to clean the ocean, capture carbon, make delicious food. Sunday's paper says this year's scallops perished in Long Island Sound before they could be caught and eaten. Oyster shells lie empty in the Gulf. We have no way to keep up with the losses, yet we all are desperate to comfort her. And this is a poem about my utility work, which creeps occasionally, but only occasionally, into the poems. I spend hours pondering things like electric utilities, but on the beach, am overcome by the need to wrestle bright snarls of plastic rope from drying seaweed. I've run for office, but in public embarrass my wife, clutching empty bottles, coffee cups, cigarette butts, urgent for a receptacle to receive them. You know what it's like. I offer wizened seed potatoes to lure my fellow workers to the soil. I pull strained compostables from a destiny as trash. It's always just beyond the boundary of acceptable. Whatever this affliction is, I think I've come to terms with it. In fact, it feels like freedom. You smile, but in a few years, you may steal a shopping cart and join me. And this one is called Chamois Shirt. For decades, I've had a shirt, actually a series of shirts, the color of late summer wheat, like our neighbor's golden retriever, actually a series of retrievers. Each swiftly moves from dignified to comfortable and rarely goes to town. This Christmas, my daughter gave me another shirt which provoked the problem of infinity. That is, the time between the full use of one thing and the first use of the next. The old shirt you love, the other you may somehow, someday feel you own. I was resolute. The bleach stain, the expanding tear on the left sleeve, the seams undoing themselves gave excuse. I donned the thick new shirt, brought scissors to the old, and made small garden plots of cloth to clean the floor, wash windows, put polish on. But infinity is always there between us. Dogs wagging their delight, shirt after shirt, the wheat we wear, the wheat that will sustain us. Down on my knees, scrubbing today's soil from the floor. That cloth I use is soft, so thin, almost gone. As we struggle with the Black Lives Matter movement and with the enormous upwelling of anger, protest, and hope for this country, I think about this poem the way I think about James Baldwin, as he spoke in the movie, I Am Not Your Negro. He sought simply to be a mirror to white America, not to preach, not even to scold, just to hold up the picture of what we were and what we were doing and are doing. He said, why do you need to be racist? Why do you need to hate? Why do you need to vilify and demonize a people? This is called Glimpse of the Savior. If you do not come to know yourselves, then you exist in poverty. From the Gospel of St. Thomas. That sudden clench of jaw, your body feels it. Grind fine powder from your teeth. The hand that squeezes till it hurts something. The foot that shoves the cat too hard against the wall. The cat knows, the children know. This is revelation staring at you right now, trying, generous, valiant as a mirror. Your own eye stutters, darts away, but there it is, something you can't ever again dismiss as ordinary. And this is another gardening poem called Gratitude. The peonies and gladiolas are more seductive every fall. I choose slips of peony root with 3 buds full of color that may prosper years from now. I dig shaggy gladiola corms plumped on slender stalks, next year's replacements for the tough, exhausted husks left from the thrust of color trumpets to the sky. Purple steeped in black, regal crimson, slim white Abyssinian, lavender that cried out to sunset orange. Bulblets cling intent on futures of their own. Beauty's nonchalant kindness accepts the slow learning of my eyes. A few days of October sun, they seem like gratitude, always a surprise. I plant the slips, come in and sort the corms, possessed by past and future blooms. I remember how I dreaded grown-ups who creaked like closing doors. Even now I fear joy might never be allowed back through my window. But gratitude's a different eye that opens, unnerving in its great permissions. In sun, on this cold porch, I'm grateful. Some shy part of me is always sitting here. No wisdom, no plan, full of psalms, no notion who I'm singing to. And this is the last one. Late autumn day. Warm and lazy as June, though the sun will set at 4:15. The promised snow has time to bring its joy by morning. Jays and chickadees flit in for seed from pine and elm. Fruit flies cluster on pear and wine. We sit on the porch, sorting through Christmas ornaments my parents will not touch again. What would each child or grandchild choose to take back to their tree? The wooden cat? Crocheted angel stuffed with cotton? Perhaps the mouse in a walnut shell, something they made in a time of simple gifts. We sit in autumn sun as the storm comes on, and weather, grief, and love proceed unsupervised. Thank you. And now I guess we get to talk a little bit.
That was beautiful, Scudder. We're
you.
asking everybody to write their comments or questions into the chat box. If you have any questions about how he writes these poems, about how he produced his first book. We do have some comments already. I'm going to tell you about Scudder.
And helpful suggestions are always welcome too.
More peonies.
More.
Jackie Weinstock said, very moving and wow. Linda Sussman said, love the shirt poem, all the twists and turns of where the shirt finds itself. Kirk Gardner says, excellent. And he does have a question. Do your poems come all at once or in pieces over time?
Rarely all at once, occasionally, but mostly over time. Judith Chalmer is on here, and she's the poet who taught me the joys of rewriting and how really there's a way you enter that first draft, that first hopeful version that you're so excited about and think is perfect. And then you visit it and you discover there's a whole lot of new room to be created and new insight to be gained by working and sticking with it and letting it speak back to you.
So, Scudder,
or letting your other editors speak back to you as well.
Yeah, Scudder, this is Wayne. I'm following on that. Where's your last contact in your poems? I have to say your ending lines are as good as they get. They're absolutely wonderful summation. But I'm curious as to where your last touch in your own poem is.
You mean I don't end with the ending line? Is that what you're saying?
Where do you finish editing your poem? Front,
God,
middle,
never.
back?
I changed a couple of poems as I read them to you.
Ah.
Oh my God!
Wow.
Well, I have to say, your ending sentences are absolutely impactful. They capture the essence of what you're trying to say. It's absolutely gorgeous.
Thank you. Uh, just to add to that a little bit, one of the things that I have to learn again and again and again is that I have to overcome the temptation to summarize and preach. You know, that's a part of my background too, and it needs constant recovery and healing. So often what I do is write the poem and then take the last stanza, the last two stanzas off and say, I don't need that. And that's maybe how you get to the end of the poem that really works.
That's really interesting because this, in a way, they're not a summation. They're just a statement in their
Right, right.
Very nice. Yeah.
We did get another question from Nancy Singh Bach. How long have you been writing the poems in this collection?
For 40 years or so. Some of them very early on. I think probably the earliest poem in the collection is the one about wild turkeys, which I wrote in East St. Johnsbury back in the days when there weren't wild turkeys in East St. Johnsbury, but now there are all over Vermont. But in episodes throughout my life I've also gone back and rewritten those poems as well.
From J.R. Fallon, how did you decide you wanted to turn your poems into a book?
That's a great question. It sort of grew on me as something I thought I wanted to do. When I read a lot of the current volumes of poetry, they're very of a piece that express basically the writing from a phase or an episode in a writer's life. And I knew my poems weren't that. They were all over the place and are all over the place. So I had to decide that I could do kind of a lifetime anthology that was also a book of poetry and the first book of poetry. So when I got to that mindset, then it was possible to think about, okay, I'll just stick these all together and see how they live with each other.
Yeah. And it works. You know, the reader who picks up this book for the first time, they're not going to necessarily know that it took 40 years for you to write them. It is an episode in your life. It's an episode of, I'm at a later stage in my life and I've written all these wonderful poems. I think it works very well. Joanna Nichols says, do you write poetry every day?
Most of the time, yes. Gardening season is sometimes possessed by a little bit of fanaticism that gets me into the garden early and exhausted late, and I don't write. But I try to write something every day. Sometimes in the winter, which is certainly more active writing time, all day long.
Nice. There's been a lot of thank yous and a lot of wonderful comments, but I'm going to stick to the questions for now. Sarah Forward has asked, what's your next writing project?
I'm just writing more poems and then seeing what they look like. One of the things that I have done, thank you, Sarah, for the question and your help. One of the things that I've done is taken some of the longer poems. There's a long poem in here called Old Home Day Parade, but I had some that were even longer and prosier. And I've started turning them into short nonfiction prose pieces. And I think I just had one of those accepted for publication. And I think that's probably a better vehicle for them. So you won't be inflicted with an 8-page, poem that looks like something Wordsworth wrote.
Well, there was a comment on here. I think it was Ricky. She said that your poem reminded her of Longfellow.
Well, hopefully the shorter Longfellow.
Diane Sorry if I can't pronounce your name. It seems like you have sections, she says. Can you talk about your idea for organizing the order of your poems?
I had lots of ideas and none of them worked. I just put them all out on the floor of our bedroom and just pieced them together and did an order. I shared that with Susan and a couple of other people, including you, Sam, and got feedback. And, you know, maybe there's a little too much preacher stuff in this clump or too much garden stuff in this clump. And I distributed them a little more evenly throughout. And then some were clumped together where they seemed like they needed to be of one shared kind of approach and experience.
Yeah, and we talked about having the illustrations in there to give people pause, right? Because
Right.
it'd be a big section of poetry, and then we wanted a little bit of time for reflection in between your sections.
Right.
Yeah.
But they're not, the pictures aren't illustrations of the poems, except maybe Adelaide's great picture of the toad.
The toad. I held up the toad.
And the elm tree, which is recurs in the poems, but has one poem of its own.
Yeah. I think there's another question from Laura Hambleton. How do you start writing on paper, in your head, on a walk?
Often with a scribbled down note, sometimes waking up in the middle of the night and going in and writing down. Always, I'm really a computer writer. I am not a computer guy. Ask my wife about my skills, but I do like to write on the computer. I find it very freeing and visually helpful.
That is interesting. It is nice that you jot something down if you wake up, you know, from a dream.
Oh yeah.
Because I think too often we forget that as an artist, you sometimes just might hear something, you know, from a dream or in the wind, what people call the muse. And it is really good. Of course, it takes a lot of work to get it from that point to the poem, but it's great that you write it down. Somebody said, Sarah Hoffman says, nice haircut.
Well, I don't know that Susan is available to other folks, but it's her turn for a haircut pretty soon, and that's a little scary.
There's another question from Jeff Forward. How do you decide where to break a line?
Good question. Sometimes it seems logical and clear, and then sometimes in the rewriting, I think, why the heck did I stick that way? So it's part of the revision process. The technical term for breaking a line when there isn't either a mental comma or a period is enjambment. It kind of carries over to the next line and brings the reader to that with a kind of oomph. And I like to use that fairly consciously to take a thought that might seem settled and make it seem a little different. I think other poets are brilliant at that. And it's a skill that, you know, sort of comes over time.
Yeah, well, you definitely have a great poet's ear for hearing where the line needs to be broken sometimes. Robbie Harold says, your themes and styles are unique to you, but are there poets you consider influences? The second part is a comment. She says she thinks you capture the Vermont landscape with the sensibility of much of Frost's work, for instance.
Well, of course, I grew up on Robert Frost. I just am working on a poem. Robert Frost was, I wouldn't call it friends, but he was a companion at times of my grandfather, who was not a great poet, but sought to bask in Robert Frost's glory. I will not try to do the same thing.
Amy Lipton asks, when does your next...
I do want to mention a couple other poets.
Oh, yes. Sorry.
And there are lots of them, you know. Jane Kenyon, one of my favorite poets. I always read her for calming and order. Elizabeth Bishop, totally captivated by Ross Gay, who is, writes in a whole different style with a whole different energy. I love the poetry of so many of Vermont's current writers. I love the work of Galway Canal. Garrett Keyser wrote wonderful things about me in this, but I fell in love with his book of poetry first. Diane Swan has a great book of poetry. I'm not sure how available it is, but I hope that at least Bear Pond carries it.
We do have it at Bear Pond, The Other Wish.
But The Other Wish. And Sidney Lee is a great inspiration.
Great. Amy Lipton says, when does your next collection come out?
Oh God, that probably not the same length of time as this one, since that would be pushing the statistics. I don't know, no idea, no idea. I'll just keep writing, and then go through the trouble for sending the poems out to journals again. Hi.
Oh, hello.
Somebody for a minute there.
This is Kathy's iPad.
Okay.
But we still have more questions in our chat box, so I'm going to plow ahead. Not everybody has a name attached. This one is Aguirre Parker.
Aguirre Parker.
Aguirre Parker.
That is my daughter, son-in-law, and maybe my grandchildren.
Yay. Well, they have two questions. One, when you write different poems, who are you thinking of as your audience? And the second part, who are you writing to?
Great question. Often when I write a poem, I have somebody that it feels like I'm writing to. There's a poem for them called Home from Hidalgo in the volume, which is clearly written to my grandsons. But then when it's written, in a sense, it belongs to anybody else who's interested. And who do I write for? Is that the second question?
Who are you writing to? Yeah.
Writing to. It's a great question. Well, it feels like poetry is a way of sharing things that aren't said or haven't been said in quite that way. And so I feel that when I read other poets, that they help expand my world and teach me something that I wouldn't have known otherwise. And I guess that's what I hope for my own poetry, is that it gives something to whomever reads it that's a different angle on the world that makes the world a little wider and richer, maybe more challenging, maybe more comforting.
Very nice. Gila says, what do you think of the haiku? Gila, G-I-L-A. I apologize in advance for botching everybody's names. What do you think of the haiku form? Fun to play with or too confining?
I love it for some things. In fact, I've written one poem that is all haiku, so I can't hold myself back and turn it into a poem of a series of haiku. I love writing haiku. It's just not what I want to use to say everything.
Yeah, that's true.
And I don't have the kind of passion or restraint that Basho or some of the others, the brilliant writers of haiku, have.
It's very hard, yes. Ricky has a clarifying point, because I mentioned that she said the poem of the world was like Longfellow, but she said she didn't think the poem was like Longfellow, but she thought it was so beautiful she would love kids to memorize it like they do Longfellow's poems.
Oh.
She said, do kids still do that in school? And I don't know if anybody here—
I will have to refer to my grandchildren or any other young people who are on this video.
I think there's a second question from, say your grandkid's last name again. Aguirre?
Gary Parker.
Aguirre Parker. When you are working on a poem, have you edited out portions and then put them back in, and then how do you decide?
Yes, I've edited things out, but then put back in some part of it. But that doesn't happen all that often. Generally, when something goes out, it's been a hard choice, but it feels like it needs to go. One of the things that editors say to poets and other writers is, I don't want to say it in the wrong way, but sometimes you have to take out your darlings, the things you think are really cute, really cool, really fun and brilliant, and they're just too cute or too cool or whatever, and you got to take them out.
Yeah. It's definitely hard. The poet will try to say too much, like you said. A lot of times in your endings, you would try to wrap it up or summarize or preach. And those might be your darlings that write the little preachy part.
Yeah, I said that conclusion so cleverly. Damn. It just doesn't work.
Yeah. J.R. Fallon, would you be comfortable referring to yourself as a poet, or do you, quote, just write poems?
Well, I hope I get to call myself a poet, and other things as well. But yeah, no, I'm a poet.
Yeah.
I'm
Rick,
out.
yes. Well, that's what the book does. Now you can say, you can back it up. Look. Rick Agran. Hi, Rick.
Oh, Rick, hi.
How did the Ladies' Home Journal article turn out? Did it do your way of living justice? And then he says, I hear Kenyon and love her flirty shirt poem.
The article was written in 1953 and came out in 1954. And it was a lovely story about this young couple leaving Westchester County in New York and moving to Vermont, which was hard work at the time. It wasn't even the hippie movement. It was pre-hippie. It was a lot of work. The story was lovely. It wasn't really true, but it was lovely. And there were great pictures, some of which were totally forged and done in composite. But the woman who did the photographs for much of the book, much of the story, was Suzanne Sass, and she was a stunningly good photographer. I seem to have disappeared, which is fine for me, but no, okay.
Oh, I can
Okay.
see.
That's good. Okay.
Nice.
She was just fantastic. She came and lived with us and took pictures that are just brilliant, brilliant.
Wow.
They're part of the family history.
Nice. We're hearing from Susan Ritz that in the Waldorf school, they memorize poems from kindergarten on. So that's
Good.
good to know. Kathy says, do you think poetry is a voice that only a few have, like musical talent?
That's a good question. I think there are lots of ways to write poetry. I think I encourage everyone to write their own poems, and if they feel very private and they are really your way of release for feelings that you can't share any other way, go for it. So, and those poems have a beauty of their own. The business of writing poetry and poems that you want to put out there and communicate means that you eventually either have to edit yourself or preferably join in editing yourself with smart editors who say, oh, this doesn't work, and give you the hard news that some of your lovely things aren't that lovely, and push you to figure something new. A lot of the people who start writing to write their very personal things are deeply hurt and offended if a poetry editor reads them and says, oh God, we gotta clean this up, because it's an assault on their personal privacy. So it's important for you as a writer to know what you're writing and whether it's your personal story and something you want to keep private, or whether it's something you want to push a little harder on and learn the hard work of actually writing something that works in ways that communicate different ways to people. I hope that's a fair answer. I think a lot of people could be better poets if they really did decide that's what I want to do. But it's fine if you decide that's not what you want to do. I have not really made any progress on the violin. You know, it just hasn't really done, it hasn't come to life for me.
Yeah.
And the neighbors would not appreciate if I tried.
Well, Kelly said, well said. Sarah Forward says, what a wise answer. Thanks, Scudder. She has a question for me, I think. Is this more people than you would see in an in-person poetry reading at Bear Pond? I think for Scudder, no. I think a lot of people would have come to the store, and we've definitely had big events there. Susan Ritz, who is here tonight,
Right.
watching, her book debuted last summer, and we packed the place with so many people I can't say in case the fire marshal is listening.
That's right. We
Yeah.
were all looking at the doors.
Although this is nice because it gives an outlet for people who aren't in the central Vermont area to be able to join us for the reading as well.
Unfortunately, there's not wine and cheese available to everyone, and I can't sign your book right now. But
I know.
anyway.
We are looking at doing more Zoom events for Bear Pond Books as well. So stay tuned. You can sign up for our newsletter at bearpondbooks.com. I think there's some more questions coming in, so let me check. Robbie Harold, are there things in the book that, despite the editor's advice, you insisted on keeping or not changing?
Yes,
I remember.
definitely. You can maybe remember some of them, Samantha, but also I had did some editing with Win Cooper, who for a number of, he did not like the Toad poem. He just said, this doesn't work, you know, and it was fine, but I said, I'm keeping it in there. And with a couple of other poems as well. So yeah, there were things that felt like, sure, this isn't a classic success, but I needed to say it and needed to put it in there.
Yeah, it's definitely a back and forth. Lots of comments. The poems are lovely, says Marion Gold. The illustration's beautiful, and I will remember the reading as a bright moment during these difficult times. Thank you, Scudder, and thanks to the wonderful team. Bill Meacham from Texas. Glad you were doing it this way.
Another classmate. I think
Thanks for
said.
joining us. It is really neat to have some people from all over.
Yes.
That we wouldn't get if we were in the bookstore. Stephen would like to make a comment about the question related to the poet and editor relationship. Go ahead, Stephen, but there's a...
I'm going to do this orally, verbally, unmuted. Hi, I just wanted to tell people that a couple of years ago, maybe a year and a half ago, Samantha and I had coffee at Capitol Grounds. And she said to me, why doesn't Rootstock Publishing have a poetry series? And of course, we've come a long way and a wonderful way. And having Scudder's collection of poetry as one of our first books of poetry has just been a real honor. And from my perspective, I have no idea whether they had terrible knockdown fights or not. But from my perspective, I have a feeling Samantha and Scudder worked together beautifully as poet and editor in the process. That's all I wanted to say.
That is true.
And thank you for coming.
Thank you, Stephen. Stephen is the publisher at Rootstock Publishing. He's the reason we're all here, really. He's doing the Zoom. And somebody says, what does Win Cooper know about toads anyhow? Thanks. And Kathy said that she's very happy to have the toad poem in there. She's a toad lover.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I mean, it's all subjective. You know, any one editor isn't going to have, you know, the all be all say of anything. It's all advice that the poet or the artist gets to take and do what they will with it. But it's good to have somebody that you can work well with.
Oh, absolutely. And then you can make a choice that's, you know, an informed choice. So
Yeah. Nancy Freed Tanzer, so glad that Bear Pond Books is still there. I lived in Montpelier 40 years ago and remember it well. Scudder, this was such a treat. Thank you for inviting us.
Nancy's parents were close friends with Susan's parents, and we spent time with them in Florida and actually in New York before we went. Susan's parents moved to Florida. So love and best wishes and memories for all four of them who have passed.
Well, the bookstore is doing great. The bookstore is open now with some
Yes.
guidelines, about 12 shoppers at a time. Everybody wears a mask. There's hand sanitizer when you arrive. And they've been doing really well with that. They put up plexiglass, you know, in front of the registers, things like that. So in the new pandemic times, the bookstore is thriving. And it's great to have new books coming out. The poetry is such a breath of fresh air, right? To read poems in times of stress. It's really nice to have something that can comfort you. And these poems certainly do that. You know, there's poems that do different things, right? There's poems of witness and poems of protest.
Yes.
And some of these quietly do that, but some of these are also, you know, poems of witness that will help you to meditate and help you stay calm and help you stay focused. And so that's a nice collection of poems to have at this time too. I can put the link up again. I don't know if we have any last questions or any last words you'd like to say, Scudder, but we might be coming to the end of our Zoom poetry reading and book launch for Scudder Parker's debut book.
You have recorded this, right? And it will be available, is that right?
It's recorded. We can put it up on the Rootstock website, Facebook. Scudder, you can have it to email out to your list if you'd like. People here who have your email, you can send it to them. Yeah.
Okay, we will definitely put it on the website. Thank you.
Yeah, and we'll also put it up on the Rootstock Publishing YouTube channel.
Okay, great. Well, I want to thank everybody who joined us. It's seeing a few of these faces of friends, longtime friends, and recent and current and neighbor friends. It's such a delight to have all of you together. I wish you could all get to know each other and mingle for a while, but thank you for being here, for sharing this with me and making it feel like such an at-home time. So Susan and I send you lots of love, best wishes, safety, and justice for our country, and change soon. Thank you.